Blackbeard is the biological clone of Rocksteady Xebec, and it's all Vegapunk's fault. Thanks to One Piece chapter 1072, we now have endless lore to explore. Not only is Kuma still climbing the red line, but Bonnie found Kuma's memories. Like, trust me, the lore in this chapter goes very, very deep. But what I want to focus on today is what happens at the tail end of chapter 1072, Stussy. Apparently, the deep dark truth of the chapter is that Stussy is a biological clone, and that would make Stussy based off of a former Rocks pirate known as Bakken. If Bakken seems familiar to you, then perfect. That'll make explaining why Blackbeard is a clone a lot easier. Basically, everything we've seen about Bakken is she's obsessed with money and Weevil. Low-key, she reminds me of Mr. Krabs because her personality doesn't really go beyond that moolah. It's so bad to the point that Bakken has literally been hunting down Whitebeard and his remnants for year after year. But aside her obsession with money, there's one more other thing she cares about in the One Piece world: Weevil. Now, Weevil's said to be the biological son of Bakken, but we don't actually know how true that really is. I believe the science group MADS actually created Weevil. Like, take a close look at Weevil, look at his appearance. There's stitches all over him that's very reminiscent of Oars and all the zombies at Thriller Bark. Not only that, but Weevil seems to be the combination of multiple pirates. Like, haven't you noticed that Weevil has traits similar to Whitebeard, Shiki, and Kaido? For an example, look at Weevil from behind. Pause. Doesn't it seem like he has the same exact hair as Shiki? There's even a moment in the anime where they show the back of Weevil, and a lot of people thought it was Shiki. No, it was Weevil. He was one of the warlords at the time. Then when you just look at the front of Weevil, you can see he has the same hat as Whitebeard, and he has the same kind of fighting style. Then the final touches of Weevil's character is he has the same legs and lips as Kaido. So it seems like Oda is going the route to say that Weevil was the combination of Shiki's DNA, Whitebeard's DNA, and Kaido's DNA. But the most fascinating detail we know about Weevil is his age. It is said that Weevil is 35 years old. If Bakken was cloned by Mads to create Stussy, and Bakken/Stussy have a relation to Mads, then I believe that Mads had their hands in creating Weevil. And if that was true, that would mean that Mads was created at least 35 years ago, which makes a lot of sense. There's not too many details that go off of when it comes to Mads, and there's only one detail when it comes to a time period. We know that Mads was created at least 24 years ago, so it's very likely when Mads was formed 35 years ago, they created Weevil, and then 11 years later is when they kind of dissolved. What further backs up this case is a recent cover of the Mads group. We see Vegapunk on the cover, and he looks extremely young. We can compare this version of Vegapunk to the one at Ohara to really see how young he is. We know the Ohara incident took place 22 years ago, so if we give Vegapunk's current age 65 and subtract 22 for the Ohara incident, then that means he was 43 at that time. But the cover of Mads where we see young Vegapunk, he looks so much younger. I would argue that that version of Vegapunk is at least 30 at the maximum. He doesn't have a mustache, his head's a lot shorter. This is a younger version of Vegapunk. And knowing that Vegapunk and Judge or the overall Mads group was messing with lineage factors to create clones, it would make sense that the Mads group again had their hands in creating Weevil. But the key detail here is that Weevil is the combination of multiple Rocks pirates. Now that we have all that out the way, let's pivot into a different topic: Blackbeard. One interesting thing we know about Blackbeard is that he's 40 years old. This would mean that Blackbeard was born 5 years before Mads was created, or since Weevil was born. And this also means that Blackbeard was born 2 years before the God Valley incident. So now we kind of have a timeline. Blackbeard was born, 2 years later the God Valley incident took place, and then 3 more years later Mads was created. Now let's take a moment to look at Vegapunk because there's key signs in his history that tell us about Blackbeard and the experiments. One thing we know about Vegapunk is he's from Karakuri Island. This is the same exact island that Professor Tsukimi's from, and this is the same exact island that Frankie went to during the time skip. It is said during Vegapunk's young adulthood, he left Karakuri because he was lacking skills and funding. This to me seems like he needed more people surrounding him, so he left Karakuri and then created the Mads Science Group. But one important speculation I have about Karakuri Island is I believe Xebec went to it in the past and he met Vegapunk. This would then create the first Rocks Pirates experiment. Perhaps Vegapunk met Rocksteady Xebec back in the day there, and Vegapunk was still a legendary scientist at that time. Xebec could have extorted Vegapunk to create a clone of himself to dominate the world, because that was Xebec's whole goal. He wanted to become king of the world. So if Xebec knew there was a scientist that could possibly clone him, that could possibly alter his body for world domination, Xebec would take the chance. I know this might seem a little confusing and speculative right now, but I promise by the end of the video you will love this. Just like how I would love if you hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell to never miss the best One Piece theory videos on YouTube. But refocusing back onto Blackbeard, I have the belief that he was born on Karakuri Island. Now let me explain. During the Drum Kingdom arc, Luffy and Sanji were getting chased by these snow rabbits. During their conversation, Luffy tells Sanji that people from snow countries never sleep. Keeping that in mind, let's fast forward 800 chapters after that. During the Oden flashback, Buggy and Shanks were having a conversation about Blackbeard, and at this moment, Buggy told Shanks that Blackbeard has never slept in his life. I believe these two items are connected, and it's a very simple assumption. If Blackbeard has never slept in his life and people from snow countries never sleep, then you could assume that Blackbeard is from a snow country. And if we circle back, we know that Vegapunk is from Karakuri Island, and it is a concrete fact that Karakuri Island is a snow country. It is a winter island. So the probability that Blackbeard is from Karakuri Island is very high. Now there's one more clue that backs up the case that Blackbeard's from Karakuri Island, and it has to do with his depiction as a child. Way back in the day, Oda drew all the warlords as children, but let's focus on the one for Blackbeard. Oda drew Blackbeard crying underneath the moon. Can we relate this to Karakuri Island in any kind of way? Yes. The interesting thing about Karakuri Island is Professor Tsukimi is from there. In case you don't remember him, this was the scientist that was in NL's cover story. If you check Professor Tsukimi's wiki, it seems like his name translates to Moon Watcher. Now it's very ironic, like why is he so obsessed with the moon? Not only that, all the automatas, all the robots he was working on, we saw on the moon. So it seems like there's some kind of inherent connection between Karakuri Island and its residents with the moon. So seeing how Oda drew Blackbeard underneath the moon crying, perhaps this is a minor clue that he comes from a country that seems to care about the moon. But the second key detail is the fact that Blackbeard is crying in the picture. If Oda's gonna draw Blackbeard as a kid crying, this is implying that Blackbeard had a tragic history. Under the idea that Blackbeard is a failed clone, he's a failed experiment of Roxy Xebec, this could have him have a tragic backstory. He could be labeled as a test subject, an accident, a demon, which is eerily similar to what happened during Robin's flashback. We know all the kids in Ohara made fun of her, they hated on her. I'd imagine something similar could happen to Blackbeard. He has a tragic backstory in the snow country of Karakuri because he's a failed clone of Xebec. This would obviously cause him to feel alienated, even to the point where he flees Karakuri Islands and he goes to an island like, I don't know, Jaya, which just so happens to be near Karakuri Island. Coincidence? I think not. But anyways, during Oden's flashback, we see that young Blackbeard running away. He's about 12 years old at this time, and it seems like he was labeled as an orphan. Now remember, if he's a failed clone of Xebec as a kid, of course he would be an orphan. So what does he do? He runs to Whitebeard, gets picked up in the crew, and he looks for the Yami Yami no Mi. But to back up a little bit and to have a quick recap, there's interesting symbolism and parallels that Oda's using at play here. Blackbeard would essentially be the failed clone of Roxy Xebec made by Vegapunk, much like how Momonosuke ate the failed clone fruit of Kaido's devil fruit because of Vegapunk. Like, think about it. If Oda went out of his way to say that Vegapunk failed multiple times with Momonosuke's fruit, maybe this is hinting this is not the first mistake or the first failure Vegapunk experienced. Now with all that out the way, let's refocus back onto Bakken because I have an interesting detail that I noticed. When I read chapter 1072, it was mind-blowing to see that Stussy is a clone of Bakken. This actually influenced me to go on the One Piece wiki and do plenty of research when it comes to Bakken. Now one thing that jumped out at me, and it was not forced, is the fact that Bakken has these colorful rings much similar to how Blackbeard does. Again, this isn't something that I forced, it kind of jumped out at me and it caught my eye. I was like, wait, they're both wearing colorful rings? I can't really think of other characters in One Piece that do that, but furthermore, we know that Bakken also wears 2 pearl necklaces at a time, just like Blackbeard does. So from a fashion perspective, it seems like Bakken and Blackbeard relate, but I think this is purely intentional because Oda's trying to make Bakken the foil character of Blackbeard. What I mean is, Bakken is the inversion of Blackbeard. Like, take a moment to think about it. Bakken is the root of a clone named Stussy, and I'm arguing that Blackbeard is the clone of the root named Roxy Xebec, which would mean that Blackbeard and Bakken are inversions. But anyways, let's refocus back onto Blackbeard. If he's a failed clone of Xebec, that would explain why he has a severely altered body. Like during Marineford, we know that Marco says that Blackbeard has a weird body. Not only that, but if Blackbeard has a weird body because he's a failed clone, it would explain why Blackbeard's able to eat 2 devil fruits. A failed experiment of a human, a gone wrong body, these 2 items are connected. Blackbeard has 2 devil fruits because he has a weird body, and he has a weird body because he's a failed clone of Xebec. And I wouldn't be surprised if Blackbeard being a failed clone also messed with his body biology or even his haki. Cause think back to the Jaya arc. When Luffy and Zoro first met Blackbeard, Zoro referred to Blackbeard as more than one. If Blackbeard's the failed clone of Xebec, perhaps there's a reason why Zoro said that. Or even circling back to Buggy, Buggy said that Blackbeard's life has been twice as fun. On the surface level, it seems like Buggy is saying that because Blackbeard never sleeps. If you never sleep, there's more hours in the day for you to have fun, so of course Buggy would say that. But if Blackbeard turns out to be the clone of Xebec, then that Buggy statement has a lot more depth. Now Blackbeard being a failed clone of Xebec could also influence his personality and all of his knowledge about the One Piece world. Like, think about it, Blackbeard's a smart, calculated man. He even sat there waiting for Luffy Lara Kid so he could snatch poneglyphs. Not only that, Blackbeard said that he made his whole big master plan even when he was on the Whitebeard pirate ship. Like, Blackbeard seems to know the true value of devil fruits and physical power in the One Piece world. Some people even argue that Blackbeard orchestrated orchestrated everything at Marineford War. So Blackbeard's whole personality, his whole makeup, it seems like he knows way too much. How would he know way too much? If he was a failed clone of Xebec, maybe he inherited knowledge and that personality. But the funny thing about Blackbeard is he relates to Xebec even in cases where it doesn't even help him. For an example, Blackbeard's ship is called the Saber of Xebec. Now if you go on the One Piece wiki, Roxy Xebec's name is likely derived from the real-life pirate Roche Brasiliano, which in English translates to Rock the Brazilian from his long exile in Brazil. So the interesting thing about this real-life pirate is it could be connected to Blackbeard's ship. Now the very clever thing to do here is take into account that Roche Brasiliano is from Brazil. The #1 language of Brazil is Portuguese. So if you take the phrase Saber of Xebec, throw it into Google Translate for Portuguese, it translates to English, know of Xebec. Or in other words, Blackbeard knows of Xebec. Now the icing on the cake is we know a Xebec is a type of Mediterranean ship. So even if you go down the rabbit hole of translating Saber of Xebec from Spanish to English, it still ends up at know of Xebec. So all in all, Blackbeard knowing of Xebec has very strong legs to stand on. Quick little shout out to my Discord server, discord.gg/333VIL, where I'm always posting hot takes, fresh new theories, and sneak peeks to videos. If you're too lazy to type in this very easy URL, there's a link in the description. Join today. But there's one more question we have to answer. How does Blackbeard know about the name of Xebec? Whitebeard, for an example, seems nothing like Xebec. Whitebeard's a family man and he values and loves his men, whereas Xebec is a captain where his crewmates quite literally were killing each other. I don't see why Whitebeard would tell Blackbeard about Xebec, or especially in any kind of glorifying way. Think about Xebec for a second. Xebec has been wiped from history. The world government doesn't want his name or legend anywhere. But if Blackbeard grew up knowing he was a failed clone of Xebec, that could explain why Blackbeard knows of Xebec. And one other thing we have to call into question is Blackbeard's territory. We know that Blackbeard defeated Marco during the Payback War. This gave Blackbeard access to countless countries, but for some reason, he chose to make Hachinosu Island his home base. And you know what's special about Hachinosu Island? This is where the Rocks Pirates are formed. Why would Blackbeard go through such lengths to relate to Roxy Xebec? I think it's because he's the failed clone of Roxy Xebec. Another key detail takes place during Marineford War. When Blackbeard was going crazy, he said he wanted to make his own age. Yeah, it's kind of vague and kind of broad, but I believe this could relate to Xebec. Not too long ago, Marines told us that before it was Roger's time, it was theirs. This is referring to the Rocks Pirates. This infers that Roxy Xebec had his own pirate age, just like how Blackbeard's trying to achieve. So perhaps the Xebec DNA used to make Blackbeard went horribly wrong, and this explains Blackbeard's true nature. It would explain why Blackbeard relates to Roxy Xebec so much. Now let's take a step back and let's look at the bigger picture. Is Oda showing us Roxy Xebec and the Rocks Pirates this late into the story because he's preparing us to see about Blackbeard? To me, it makes sense. Oda could do a 2-in-1. We learn about Roxy Xebec while simultaneously realizing that Blackbeard's the failed clone of him. So with that being said, let's actually pivot into a different character, a different topic, Shanks. Recently, it was revealed that in volume 4 billion, Shanks is a baby from God Valley. And we know that Shanks was raised by a pirate who worked with Garp to defeat Rocks, Roger. Did Roger ever talk to Shanks about where he's from? What happens there? God Valley? I believe this is very likely. Wouldn't it seem kind of odd if we end the One Piece story and Shanks doesn't know about Xebec? It would be really cool for this to be the truth when you think about Shanks fighting Blackbeard. It's a possibility that when Shanks fought Blackbeard back in the day, Blackbeard revealed that he was the return of Xebec or something to that capacity. Hearing or seeing proof of that could have shook Shanks so much to the point he was caught off guard and got scarred. I'd imagine back then clones in One Piece weren't commonplace, let alone a Roxy Xebec clone. Now leaving alone the topic of Shanks, let's talk about the Lurking Legend. Most One Piece fans think the Lurking Legend is either Emu or Roxy Xebec. But in Jump Festa, Oda mentioned that the Straw Hats will be fighting against the Lurking Legend of the One Piece world. And soon after that, the Rocks Pirates were finally name dropped in the manga. And then after that, we learned a little bit about Xebec and the God Valley incident. If Blackbeard is the clone of Xebec and Xebec is the Lurking Legend, then technically the Straw Hats will be fighting Xebec or the Lurking Legend. Straw Hat Pirates versus the clone of Roxy Xebec, the Lurking Legend, Blackbeard. And who knows, maybe we'll be getting some answers very soon because we know that Garp is about to fight Blackbeard. With all the relations from Blackbeard to Xebec, Garp will surely see Xebec inside of Blackbeard. So maybe Garp will see the same thing that shocked Shanks and caught Shanks off guard. Now if this theory is true, if Blackbeard is the failed clone of Xebec, then this adds way more depth to Ace versus Blackbeard. Ace's father Roger is the reason Xebec died or was captured or whatever his fate was. For Blackbeard to fight Ace, even if it was totally by fate, is a beautiful twist of fate. It is essentially Blackbeard getting revenge against Ace. So when Luffy defeats Blackbeard, not only will it be revenge for Ace, but it'll also be Luffy following in the footsteps of Roger. Because in short, the two pirate kings of the One Piece Beast World, Luffy and Roger will have both fought and defeated Rocksteady Xebec. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell down below. I have 4 videos on screen, banger theories. Make sure to check them out. I have a lot of good content on my channel. But that's about it. See ya.